Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back Charlotte Harris-Rees. She is the author of Secret Maps of the Ancient World and the Asiatic Fathers of America, and she has just released a new publication called Chinese Sailed to America Before Columbus, More Secrets from the Dr. Hendon M. Harris Jr. Map Collection. It is a great pleasure to welcome her back because, in my view, and I think in her view, she's involved in something as interesting as a Da Vinci Code real-life adventure. It's not a joke, that comment, because, in fact, her father had maps from the ancient world that have demonstrated that the Chinese not only were in America thousands of years before Columbus, but it is being held up for verification in the Library of Congress. This has now become a quiet and yet very political phenomenon that's happening. We interviewed Charlotte a few years ago about her book, Secret Maps of the Ancient World. All of you should listen to that interview as a primer for this. There are developments in the last 2 years and a new book, and I really am so pleased with the work you're doing. Welcome, Charlotte Harris-Rees, to It's Rainmaking Time. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you, Kim. That's a great introduction.
Thank you. It's true. You know, I view you as somebody who has a love of learning and is very honorable and works with and through other people and is a professional cooperator. You cooperate with people. Your research is stellar, and you're willing to be wrong. And because of that, I'm very interested in your findings. I think your dad is standing up clapping in heaven.
So.
He is, I'm sure, clapping for the work that you're doing. You probably were in your innocence when you were waiting for the Library of Congress to validate these maps. I think that the fact that your bubble has been burst and the fact that they are deliberately giving false information about the real origin of America, who was here thousands of years before the supposed first person to discover America, and the fact that they are not cooperating with you and not giving you a timeline for when your father's maps would be validated is very telling. And I'm sure you didn't expect to be involved in some political wrangle, but I think you're in it now, whether you like it or not, just based on the fact that you're very much wanting to tell the truth and to really get the word out about the real origin of America. So talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk about your book.
Okay, first off, I liked your introduction about the Da Vinci Code, and I use that frequently when I speak, because this really is a real-life situation where maps similar to my father's have been in museums for hundreds of years, and yet people have not recognized what they mean, which was the thesis of course, the book Da Vinci Code, that the Mona Lisa was, there were secrets on the Mona Lisa. Of course, that was all fiction. But these maps have been hidden in plain sight, and because people didn't think anyone could travel that far that soon, they said the map is part real and part fictional. And the world map, the Chanhado or Tian Xia, which is the title of the main map that my father talked about. And so people did not believe that they were real. Now, my contest with the Library of Congress, people can read about that on my website. There's actually an email there on my website that went around the world, and my website is www.harrismaps.com, and they can read about that. But not only is our map involved, and but also they have a map there themselves that's dated to the late 1300s AD, and they admit it's dated to that date, but they refuse to fully authenticate it. Now, that particular map has both Asian and Romanized writing on it. It shows Asia and part of North America, so which would indicate if it's late 1300s, it's pre-Columbian. And yet they refuse to fully authenticate it, though they've had it now probably close to 60 years. And so anyway, that's part of the contention too.
We spoke in the first interview 2 years ago with you about the authentication process and the Library of Congress as an entity, and I do want you to contextualize who they are, what they do, and what their accountability is so that the public listening today is clear.
Okay, the Library of Congress is the number one library in the world. It was originally built to be the library for our Congress, but it is where all books are copyrighted, musical pieces are copyrighted. They have a fabulous map collection there, probably the best in the world. I've been into the vault there. It's larger than a football field. It just goes on and on and on, and you don't just walk in and go into the vault. You have to be taken into the vault. And not everybody that goes there to research is even invited into the vault. But and you go with somebody from the Library of Congress. But they also have different divisions. Now, I want to say that the man who was the chief of the Asian division of the Library of Congress and retired just a few years back, Dr. Hua Hui Li, has endorsed both my book, The Asiatic Fathers of America, The Secret Maps of the Ancient World, and also Chinese Sailed to America Before Columbus. So he has endorsed both of those books. Now, the other book, The Asiatic Fathers of America, that is my abridgment of my father's book, and of course he's all for that too. But Hua Hui Li has endorsed these books, and he has opened a lot of doors for me. But one man can only do so much, and he has since retired from the Library of Congress.
I want to go back a little bit to the fact that you've had communication back and forth with the Library of Congress for how many years now?
I started this research 9 years ago.
Okay. Now, what is the process if they were to all of a sudden decide to, quote, authenticate your father's maps?
Actually, that is not the main problem. My father's maps have been authenticated. It is to recognize that Chinese, what the maps mean. Now, my father's maps are authenticated in that they said that they're genuine Tianxia and Chanhado maps. But when I went to the Library of Congress, they said, well, we are not the expert on Asian maps. And so other people came in. Of course, the Library of Congress never did get anything official in writing, but other people came in, and our maps were there at the Library of Congress for 3 years. And at that time, they expressed interest in buying the map collection.
For how much?
There was no price that was ever set. They said that it's their policy that you have to start out with. You have to tell them what your price is. And my family, the price that my family wanted was not anything that was close to what they wanted to pay. See, I'm one of 7 siblings who co-own these maps. They're not just mine. My father died in 81, and so I'm one of 7 siblings. So it's not just my opinion. It's the family at large.
So they wanted to buy the maps, and yet they didn't want to verify or authenticate them, supposedly, even though you've had them authenticated by who?
I had some of the leading experts. Dr. Xiaokang Li from Beijing was there. He was working for the Library of Congress, and he has said that these are genuine Tianxia Chanhado maps. It's not that anyone has questioned that these are genuine maps. It's what's being questioned is what the maps signify. And now the Library of Congress has come out with a book that talks about world maps. It does mention maps like this in there, and it does say that the right side of this map might be America. But now it's putting the date of this map at a date which would be 100 years after Columbus arrived in America. So it according to that.
Is this the Reese map?
No, this is the Chanhado Tianxia map that they're talking about. The Reese map is a different one.
Okay, so then they came out with a book that is talking about this other map and this other scenario.
Well, actually, their book talks about all kinds of different maps around the world, and one of the maps that it does mention is the Tianxia Chanhado style map.
You put puzzle pieces together along with Gavin Menzies and others, but I'm sure that you, on a deep level, understand the tremendous resistance to acknowledging what your father's maps mean.
Oh, yes. Yes, I certainly do. And yet, Kim, I'm still getting invitations from many different locations. In fact, I'm going to be quite busy this spring and going to different locations speaking in Europe. And I even have an invitation to go to Australia, China, Washington, D.C., L.A. I have lots of different invitations to go to different places and explain what information I brought together.
You put in a part of the new book, Chinese Sailed to America Before Columbus, that there are times in which truth has to reign over peace.
Yes.
I summarized it, but basically the essence is that at this point, even if you're ruffling feathers, you'd rather the truth be known. With the tremendous fear and concern about Chinese supremacy in the monetary level, the world power and position, the mysterious culture, I'm talking from the American point of view, tremendous paranoia as well, and an anger that a lot of the business has been sent over to China, the sentiment doesn't seem ripe for accepting this body of discoveries, really. Yet, there are people who are receptive and who really want to know.
Right.
But at the same time, in our last interview, we had talked about the thinking that you don't want to necessarily give them ammunition to try to come back and take over the United States. A lot of people,
oh no,
they go there in their mind. And I want you to speak to that because you know what? It's a valid concept because of the sentiment and the concern here. There's a lot of concern here about China. I know you know why, but speak to that for a moment.
Okay, Kim, let me say first, I'm an American. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. My family and relatives have been in America for a very long time. And yet I want truth to be told. I don't want anything bad to happen to America. And if I thought anything bad would happen to America as a result of what I'm saying, I would not say it. However, I think that truth needs to be told. I tell people all the time, we don't expect that the French and the Spanish are going to come back and try to take America. No, we don't expect that the British are going to come back and try to take America. So why would people think that the Chinese would try to come back and take America? I think that it's obvious by just looking at the Native Americans where they came from. And when people study DNA, they find out that, yes, they did come from Asia. But I think it's just part of the big picture.
Talk about the Native Americans coming from Asia, because for a lot of people, that's a huge shock.
Well, many people have been saying, when I talk to them, when people listen to the explanations that I give about the correlation between the customs in Asia and the customs of the Native Americans, the advanced technology that happened among some of the Native Americans, the only explanation they can come up with is that this had to have come from Asia. But there is a big correlation, even down to the point that some of the Native Americans have a parasite in their breast milk that is also in the breast milk of Asian babies, Chinese babies, and it's only passed from the mother to child through the nursing of the baby. So if they don't believe the DNA, they should believe the parasite. There have been many books written about things that have been carried back and forth, things that have been found in the wrong place. The American peanut has been found in more than one Chinese dig from 2000 BC, dated to 2000 BC, and many things from Asia found in American tombs, ancient Peruvian tombs, or in Chinese writing in America. Many things carried back and forth. So there definitely is a correlation. One of the interesting things that I just read the last couple days is that some of the Canadian Native Americans are applying to the Chinese government to help them in human rights conflicts that they're having in Canada. And it will be interesting to see if the Chinese government does come to their aid.
That is going to be interesting. Well, I think there'd need to be a recognition of the connectedness of the peoples.
Yes, and I know of at least one instance where a Navajo Indian went with a group of Chinese back to China and to meet his Chinese relatives. One of the interesting stories that I heard is about Yo-Yo Ma, who's the famous cellist.
Yes.
And they were doing a DNA study, and they found out that he was related to Eva, and I can never say her last name, on one of the Desperate Housewives, who's Native American.
Oh, wow.
And what's interesting is that Yo-Yo Ma's family, his parents were the first generation out of China, and yet their DNA shows that they're related. But I think that more and more studies are going to come out like this, where they'll trace them back to the exact family that they're from.
Talk a little bit about DNA testing. For many of us, I'd say for most of us, we don't really know what's done and how it works. Can you give us a context?
DNA testing can be done any kind of bodily fluid. They can even do a swab in the mouth, and they do DNA testing. And from that, they test the mitochondrial DNA usually. And the mitochondrial is what passes from mother to child, and it passes unchanged. Unlike our regular DNA, which is a combination of our parents, the mitochondrial passes unchanged. So it can go many generations and be the exact duplicate of what's before. And then there might be a very small mutation in the DNA. So the Native Americans, their DNA is most of the haplogroups from the Native Americans are A, B, C, and D.
What's a haplogroup? I know you've mentioned it in the first interview 2 years ago, but I want you to lay it out for us today.
It's a grouping of DNA. I guess that's the easiest way to explain it. And I am no expert on DNA, but this is what I've studied. But it's a grouping of DNA. And 98% of the Native Americans are A, B, C, and D. Now, there is a small subgroup of X, which is also found in China, but that's a whole different story. But these A, B, C, and D are the 98%. After many years, there might be a mutation, but so we know that the DNA from Asia, from the Native Americans, is slightly different, but basically the same as the DNA from Asia and specifically from China.
What about the labs, DNA labs? How do you know whether the labs are connected in politically with certain groups or not? How do you know that they're doing pure work, if you know what I'm saying?
Oh, okay. The initial studies on DNA were done for medical purposes because different ethnic groups respond differently to different medications. For instance, Asian children react differently in a bad way to Tamiflu, which is something that we might take to help stop flu. Anyway, so they did this medical testing not to prove any point. But what they did was they came up that Native Americans had these A, B, C, and D haplogroups. But they've divided, I guess, the world into different haplogroups and see how they respond to different medicines. Now, an interesting sidelight to this is I think that eventually they will have our own private DNA that the doctors will be able to use to find out what medicine is going to help Kim or what medicine is going to help Charlotte, because we are all individual people, and so we need specialized medicine that will help us and not hurt us. The studies were done not to try to prove something. In fact, they were not done by Chinese people saying, okay, we're going to claim the Native Americans. They were done by Western labs that were trying to prove this. And there are several different implications. In fact, one of the early people that discovered this was someone in Australia, and he said that the Native Americans have Asian DNA.
Very interesting. Talk a little bit about how the Harris maps are not carbon dated. They're expensive, and there's other problems with carbon dating. Would you share a little bit about that and expand our understanding of carbon dating and why the maps are not carbon dated in your experience?
How we have dated our maps is the way that they usually date map books like this. And there are, as I mentioned before, other map books like ours. And it's partly by what else is in what other maps in the series. And for instance, there's a map in the series that is a 1471 map. There's a map in the series, two maps that are 1471 maps. There's a map of Korea that's a 1481 map. There's the Cognito, which is the 1402 map. No, I'm sorry. The Cognito is not in our books, but in our map books there are other maps. There is a Chinese map which is from a very early date. So we date it with that. Now, to do carbon dating, you have to cut a piece out, and I am personally in favor of doing that. But as I mentioned before, there's 7 of us, and I cannot just take a piece of the map and cut them out, and then that piece is forever gone. I did mention in Chinese Sailed to America Before Columbus someone else who did have her map carbon dated because she had no other maps in a book. She just had the one world map. And they gave her a wide span of several hundred years. And so I said, what's the sense in paying a large amount of money to have them carbon dated if you already know that they're in that time span?
So carbon dating could be off by hundreds of years or thousands of years?
Hundreds.
Okay.
I guess it depends on how far you back. The further you go back in history, the more years it could be off.
And who are the people that do the carbon dating, and are they trustworthy if they're politically connected to, let's say, the Library of Congress, the federal government, and who else?
I don't believe any of that, that they would be wrong. Now, I could be wrong, but I think she told me it was the same people that had dated the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, I don't think...
You know what I like about you, Charlotte? Among many things, you have retained your total innocence even to this moment. And I like it that you're not a skeptic. I'm not a skeptic, but I have had experiences that have allowed me to see that even good people doing good work can be given orders to do things that they don't want to do. And they can't leave their post and they can't fight the powers that be. But the carbon dating seems simple enough to do. I don't know what it would really prove or why you would need to do it. Is that the issue with the Library of Congress?
Well, their particular map that I mentioned earlier, they said that they had carbon dated it and they came up with the late 1300s date. So somehow their dating is more exact. I don't know, but yet they didn't want to fully authenticate it.
Okay. It's interesting. Let's talk about the European maps that were shown of America, where you said regarding the Strait on Anian, that there was too much too soon shown on those maps. I want you to just lay it out. I don't want to give much away in the way of your book, but I thought this was important just as a little piece.
Early American explorers, when they came to North and South America, they started drawing maps when they were still on the East Coast, had not reached the West Coast, before they had even reached the Pacific. They were drawing maps of the whole West Coast. And everybody marvels, how could they have done it? And they were relatively accurate maps, even showing the Bering Strait, which was not even discovered by Westerners until several hundred years later.
Is that what you're calling the Strait of Anian?
Yes, the Bering Strait.
So that is the Bering Strait?
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
So very early on, they were drawing the Bering Strait. Now, how did they even know it was there? And I explained in Secret Maps of the Ancient World that finally the British paid to have somebody find it. That was not until 200 or 300 years later. So they were drawing all this. Now, one of the things that I find really interesting is the 1602 map that was made in China.
Is that the Risi map?
Yes.
Okay, talk about that.
That map was made in China. Well, actually, it was a priest from Europe who made it in Chinese in China, collaborating with the Chinese. Now, that map shows, on the Great Plains, it shows buffalo. Okay, now if you stop and think about it, it shows buffalo and wild horses. It discusses them. And if you stop and think about it, 1602 is before 1607, the founding of Jamestown. And Jamestown is on the East Coast in Virginia, my home state. It's on the East Coast, and yet the Great Plains is in the middle of the continent. None of the European explorers had gotten to the middle of the continent by 1602. And so how in the world did they know, this priest in China, know that there were buffalo on the Great Plains? Well, 200 years after that was when Lewis and Clark finally get to the Great Plains, and sure enough, there are buffalo there. So how does this 1602 map show that? And there are other things that it shows. It names Canada. I thought it was interesting that it names in Chinese Bahama, just where the Bahamas are. And also I found very interesting that the 1602 map in Chinese names the Amazon nation, because I had mentioned in Secret Maps of the Ancient World that I thought perhaps Amazon was of Chinese derivation. No one's been able to find out where the word Amazon came from. And even the 1602 map even mentions the word, which sounds like Mayan, and hints at architectural structures. Now, to me, this is just mind-blowing that we know that this map is 1602 because the European man was involved with it. The European priest was involved with it. There are copies of this map in American universities. There's copies of this map in Japan now. So we know that this is an authentic map, and yet it's showing all these things, and we're saying, how in the world did they have it unless somebody was there and saw it? So he had to have gotten, this European priest had to have gotten this information from the Chinese because it's made in China, and he did have collaboration from the Chinese. Now, for years they said that Matteo Ricci, he did this map himself, but now they're finally saying, well, he did this in collaboration with the Chinese scholars.
The plot thickens.
Yes.
Indeed. What other interesting treasures would you like to share? And then I do want to talk about the Korean influence in map making and relationship to the Japanese and the Korean works. But please go ahead.
Well, in writing this book, one of the big revelations to me was in trying to understand this map. I saw a comment on the internet recently that somebody said, you know, what this map looked like, and it wasn't very complimentary, and it is a strange-looking map. And I know that when I first looked at it, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. But one of the big things in doing the research was finally discovering what that outside circle of water is. And in a lot of these maps that are similar to my father's maps are the actual outer ring, not the water ring, but the land ring inside that is much more square than even the one that I show on the cover of this book. But anyway, that outer circle of water isn't water at all. And what it is it's where the earth meets the sky. And so this goes with the Chinese theory that the heaven is shaped like an umbrella, is round and shaped like an umbrella. The earth is square like a chessboard. And so they have this square earth inside the round umbrella. And when you take away the outer water, then the map becomes, to me, much more understandable. Because to me, before that, it was just like, okay, we've got these endless rings of water and land and water and land, and, you know, what in the world is going on? But when you take that away and say that's just the atmosphere, then the map makes much more sense.
How did you get to that revelation? In other words, did you have people in the Chinese imagery helping you with things? How did you get there?
It was just by reading different texts, and it was a Korean text. Now, the man that I was reading about that this is actually the atmosphere. He still could not see that it was America divided, and so I thought, oh my goodness, he can see that this outer edge is the atmosphere, but he yet was not able to recognize that America had been cut in half, as other scholars had stated. So different scholars had different pieces of the puzzle. I had to go to a lot of different places for this information.
You want to talk a little bit about the Korean maps? I think also I want people to understand that your dad was born in Kaifeng, China, correct?
Yes.
And that he had gotten these maps at an antique store?
He had gotten the first of his maps at an antique store in Korea. And he was not looking for maps at all. He was looking for paintings. And because he would come back to the United States periodically and would sell the paintings to make a little bit of extra cash. And so the proprietor of the store said, well, do you want to look at map books? And he said, oh, sure, I'll look at a map book. And then when he looked at it and saw that it had Fusang, which he had read about, that this was America, but that nobody was able to prove it. He saw Fusang on the American coastline, and he said, oh, my goodness. And he became so weak he had to sit down.
What was your dad's background?
As far as education or what?
Just his background, work, kind of life in China.
Oh, okay.
He was born in China, but give a little bit of background about when he came to America, how long he was in China. Share a little bit that you know.
Oh, okay. He was born, like I said, he was born in Kaifeng, China, to missionary parents. His grandparents had also been missionaries, and so when he came back to the United States when he was 10 years old, and after that, then it was a few years later. Then they had the Great Depression, so he wasn't able to go back. By the time his parents went back to China, he had already started college. He started college at only 16 years old.
Wow.
And, he was a very brilliant man, but he always had a love for China and wanted to go back to China. And so he was a missionary himself. He has had a doctorate in theology.
Did he speak the language?
Oh, yes. He spoke it well. And, however, when he became an adult, he forgot his childhood Chinese. But when he became a missionary, he went to Taiwan because at that time China was closed to outsiders. And so he went to Taiwan. When he relearned Chinese, he learned it with the accent from Kaifeng.
Interesting.
And so somewhere in your brain it's stored. Now, one of the things, I spoke Chinese well as a child, and whenever I go back to China for any period of time, I try to study Chinese, and everybody tells me I speak with a Taiwanese accent.
You had written that many of the old maps, the Korean maps, were destroyed as a result of Japanese occupation, and yet the Korean maps seem to be very important too. Can you talk about that? Okay,
right. There were several times that Korea was occupied by the Japanese, and they either took or destroyed many of the Korean maps. But the Koreans, a lot of their maps, and they say this all along, a lot of their maps are borrowed from the Chinese. Now, the Koreans themselves, they claim that they are the originators of this particular Chanhado or Tian Sha map. That's what they claim, that they were the ones that made this map. And yet there's much evidence that this map came from the Chinese. In fact, the oldest known positively dated copy of the Tian Sha Chanhado map is in a Chinese book. And Joseph Needham, who is the leading scholar, Western scholar on all things Chinese, he mentions an incident from a text from the 3rd century AD that talks about something that happened in the 18th century BC regarding a map of this style. Now, it doesn't draw the map, but it talks about that the map has the Fusang tree, which is, the Fusang is what we believe to be America, and that has the Fusang tree, and it has the concentric circles. So we definitely believe that it's the same style map, that it goes back that far in time.
You said in the book that your dad believed that the Qian Sha maps,
Yes.
which were undated and unsigned, he felt that they had descended from extremely early Shanhai Jing maps?
Yes.
Talk about that.
Okay, the Shanhai Jing, Shan means mountain, Hai means sea, and Jing means revered text. And so it has been quoted down through Chinese history. And it talks about travels to the ends of the earth. And part of these travels are to a land that's called Fusang, or land to the east. And what is east of China? A big land, other than the Americas. But it does describe travels all over the world. And the Chinese text said that originally there was a map that accompanied the Shanhai Jing, but somehow over the years, the thousands of years, because this was reportedly written about 2000 BC, about the time of Sarah and Abraham of the Old Testament. But anyway, that it was the map and the Shanhai Jing were separated. So my father believes that this is the map that accompanied the Shanhai Jing because 72% of the place names on this map are from the Shanhai Jing. And the history of cartography will tell you that 72% of the place names are from the document, the Shanhai Jing. And they are in the locations that the Shanhai Jing said they would be. If they say they're in the north, they're in the north. If they're in the northeast, each location plays out where they said they would be. Now, over the years, many people believed that the Shanhai Jing was just myth because some of the place names are very strange place names. Some of them are like Land of Women. How do you have a land of women with no men? How are you going to propagate yourself? But there is this, the Land of Women is on these maps. In fact, it's in two different places. One is in the location of where the Amazons would be, and one is in the location that we believe would be California. And on early Spanish maps, they also had a Land of Women on the location of California.
When you say a placeholder, what do you mean? I know what it sounds like, but why would a placeholder be on a map? Like you just name something?
It's fantastic names that don't sometimes make sense to us.
Okay.
But maybe it was a land that was run by women, or the women were in charge of the government, or maybe it was a land that the men were off hunting someplace, and the people who were traveling just encountered women.
Got it. Now, the interesting thing about at least with the Korean maps that I read about, I'm sure it's with other maps, was that these maps were so serious. They had state secrets, where naval bases were, where underground bunkers were, all kinds of things. You want to talk about how important the maps were?
Right. The maps that are in the other maps in the map books, they do, like you said, have state secrets, where the water wells are, where the military bases are. I was told at one time that if a private citizen had been found with a map like that, he might have been executed because it had too many state secrets. Yet the first map in this album is this world map, which people are saying is imaginary. Now, why in the world would you put an imaginary map in with something that would be a state secret, that somebody could lose their life over having that information? It just didn't make sense that the world map would be something that would just be imaginary. And yet at the same time, I truthfully don't believe that the Koreans totally understood what the world map represented. I believe that it's a borrowed map that they got from the Chinese. They did not understand that many of these faraway lands were real people. But at that period of time when our particular maps were circulating in Korea, Korea, because of Chinese dominance, was shut down to the outside world. So they were just using a map that they had been given by somebody else.
I wonder if it's possible to have a kind of repository or a clearinghouse of the new developments that Gavin Menzies and his team and you and your team and others could assemble. Evidence-based stuff. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're all connected and passing information back and forth and doing what you can to verify things and contextualize your findings. I wonder if the puzzle's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, I'm sure that it is. I'm sure that it is. And I know of about 8 people who are working on books on different aspects of this right now. That their books are close to being ready to be published. One man is working just on the 1602 map. I think that will be an excellent book when it comes out.
You mean an analysis of what it means?
Right. And that map clearly shows that North America, it's no question that it's North America. Now, when some people look at our map, they say, how in the world can this be North America? And yet, people who are using it at the time say that this is North America divided. But the 1602 map is a very clear early map that shows America.
Are you allowed to say who's coming out with that book yet?
I don't think that I can say that yet.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that he's done a lot of research. He's very well qualified. He has a PhD. He's Chinese, so he can read all the information on it. And I think that's just one of the examples of what's coming out now. It will be an excellent work. But there are many different aspects of this that are being studied all at the same time. And the field is so broad of the people in the past who have studied this. For instance, people who have studied the comparison of the Mayan calendar with the Chinese calendar, they've spent a lifetime studying that one thing.
How interesting.
And
do you know people like that? I
have talked to people like that.
I would love to interview them.
If you go back to Secret Maps of the Ancient World,
yes,
and I will tell you later some names, but if you go to that. Now, for all the listeners, too, if you just go on Amazon, and there's a certain aspect of my book that you want to see from within the book, go on the title of the book and say, look inside the book. And if you just go to Secret Maps of the Ancient World and type in Mayan calendar, you'll find what I said about the Mayan calendar. It will take you right to that particular page. And so I use that a lot myself in finding out, okay, now what page did I write this on in the book? You can use that as a study tool.
We're hopelessly entwined with internet everything, aren't we?
Yeah, but it's funny that the author sometimes uses Amazon to find out what's inside my own book.
It's kind of wild, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What are some of your hopes in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of your work now?
Well, I would like to see others studying this. One of the things that my father said, he said we need more young researchers to pick up the spade and dig deeper. And I guess that was what I would like to see. Of course, I'm going to continue to do it, but I am just a one-person operation. I don't have a secretary. I work out of my home. I read a lot of books. And the Internet has been wonderful in being connected with a lot of different people around the world. When I sent out my new book, Chinese Sailed to America Before Columbus, I had some pre-release sales of that book, and before it was even released, I had orders from 5 continents and all across the United States. So there are a lot of people all over the world who are interested in this subject of America and its connection with ancient China.
I like the way your books are packaged, the way they look, they feel ancient, and the big writing in it.
Oh, yeah. That's partly because I'm ancient. I like the big writing.
I think it's great. Do you have your own graphics people that do this beautiful work for you, or is this a publisher thing?
Author House did that. I had to insist with them that I wanted the 14-point instead of the 12 because I thought it would explain it better. I did go to that larger size, 8.5 by 11, because I wanted more of the maps to show. So I have done that. I would love to be able to do it in a book that I have the maps in color in the book.
That sounds like a coffee table book to me.
It could be. It very well.
In fact, it could be gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that would be a great book. And talk about something to talk about at the coffee table.
Now, I'm already talking about my next 2 books.
Are you? What are you doing?
I have some ideas. Chinese had talked about their travels in the United States, and I have been to some of those locations. They're very similar to what was described, and I would sort of like to do a travelogue, do the whole long trip and write it up and say, this is what they described and this is what I found, and it is amazing how similar it is to what they described. I have no doubt that they were here, Kim. I have no doubt at all.
I don't either after reading your books and Gavin's. I really don't.
But I think it all goes back to that people were traveling the world. It wasn't just Chinese. And as I mentioned in Secret Maps of the Ancient World, it wasn't just Chinese and it wasn't just Minoans. There were other people who were traveling the world by the seas at very early dates. And one of the big revelations to me was when I compared this map to the map made by NOAA, the U.S. government organization that does mapping of the seas, and it showed where the currents in the ocean travel around the world. And to demonstrate that, they had to do a map that has the Americas divided. And I was giving a lecture one time, and I looked up at this map produced by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Yeah, NOAA, right?
Yeah, NOAA. And I said, they have Americas divided just as it is on this map. And I think that part of the reason that the Tian-Shan-Hado maps were divided was China was in the middle. And, definitely we start a map from where we are, but also because it's indicating that they traveled by the sea. And this is where the sea would have taken them. So you have them coming around Africa. You have them coming through the Atlantic, the Pacific. They could travel everywhere by this way. And Chinese DNA and Chinese artifacts have been found all over the world.
What do you think about the Library of Congress? Do you think that they're going to ever address your request?
I sort of doubt it, because right now they're the elephant, I'm the flea. If they address it, then it could open a big can of worms. So I sort of doubt that they will. But I've tried to build up such a tsunami of evidence that they have to address it. But I don't know. And speaking of tsunamis, one of the interesting things is the tsunami that had happened just in 2011 because of that Japanese earthquake. The things from that tsunami have already hit the west coast of the Americas in the same path that people could have crossed the Pacific. There's this river that's 60 miles wide in the Pacific that carries objects from Asia to America. It's continually flowing in a racetrack shape and bringing things to America, and it's brought the tsunami things down to the American west coast, starting in Canada and going down the west coast of the United States. But that current is constantly flowing, and I believe that's how the earliest Asians came to America, is by that current.
Oh, interesting. I don't want to end this segment with you without talking about your daughter, Minty. The book is dedicated to her. Something about her.
Wow. Vinci died in a car crash in 2005, 8 days after I spoke at the Library of Congress. And that was, wow, such a blow, because it was such a high speaking at the Library of Congress, and then such a low to get a phone call and said that your 29-year-old daughter has been killed in a car crash. And for years I did not say anything in public about it for fear that when I spoke in public, I would cry, and I didn't want to do that. Minty was adopted. My three children are all adopted, and we were told that her birth father was Cherokee. And so we don't know a whole lot about him. In fact, that's just about all that I know about him. But I was told by a dentist at one time that she had a very different type of teeth, which in doing this research, I found that, yes, many Native Americans do have the Asian type of teeth. And so I believe that she was definitely half Native American.
I know that she would be so proud of you right now. And I'm sure she's honored that you dedicated the new book to her. Thank you for sharing that with us.
We really miss her, but she's such a sweetheart. You know, when we went to her house to see her widower that day, there on her computer was my speech from the Library of Congress that she had downloaded.
I'm so sorry about the loss of your daughter. It's one of the great losses of a person's life is to lose their child.
Yes. You know, I had been in the news just before that in our small town because I was going to speak at the Library of Congress, and so they come rushing out, and they wanted a statement from me, and I just said my heart. I said, you know, I'm just thankful to God that I had her for the 29 years. You know, what a gift she was, and I really am. That was the truth. You know, I'm just so thankful. And my husband and I have grieved over the loss of her, but we're so thankful for her life, and I thank God for that.
I really want to thank you for coming back and sharing your time and your new book and revelations with us. Thank you very, very much for the leadership and wanting the truth to come out about who was here before Columbus and all the writing and research and putting together the pieces of a mystery, a worthy puzzle. We look forward to your new books. Thank you for being a guest on It's Rainmaking Time. For those of you who would like to order her books, you can go to AsiaticFathers.com, ASIATIC Fathers.com. You can also go on Amazon, and you can also order the CD as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim.